Okay, Nigel, I think we've got one or two more joining, but you're live on YouTube and ready to go.
Okay, thank you for that, Matt. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first overview and scrutiny meeting of 2020. And for those of you who have not spoken to before, a Happy New Year to you, one and all. Just to cover a couple of the sort of procedural points before we move on to the agenda proper. Can you just make sure the usual precautions that we have with regard to telephones switched off and making sure that if you do need to get up and move around that you switch off your video in so doing. And if you would like to speak, if you can make either a raised hand or a blue hand. And if I can't see you, then Matt, being the host of the meeting, will hopefully see you and remind me and prompt me accordingly so that we ensure that everybody's questions are recognized and covered. So without more ado on that, could we just cover the matter of apologies, Matt, for absence?
Yeah, I have just received an email apologies from Councillor Emma Spagnola.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think also this is the first meeting for Councillor Brown. You've attended on other occasions, but as a full committee member, welcome to your first meeting.
I think it's the same for Councillor Fisher as well. Councillor Peter Fisher.
Oh yes, I believe it is. Yes, I think you too have. Yes, good morning to you. My remiss on that one. I know Councillor Cushing has joined us as well. You were at the previous meeting as a full committee member. Anyway, what I ought to just say at this point, I think now that we've had 3 or 4 new members join, it is our intention to put together a training session for not just for new members, but a refresher for everybody at some stage in the not too distant future. So just for those new members in particular, just note that we will be doing something along those lines in the near future. Right, okay, so any substitutes do we have today, Matt?
I haven't been notified of any now.
Thank you. Moving to public questions and statements, I'm not aware of any. Are there any?
None received.
Thank you. Moving to the matter of minutes, can we move to review and approve the minutes of the last meeting, which was in December last year. So that's agenda item 4. Page 1, any observations? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Does anybody have any observations that they haven't already raised on those? And are you content then that I should sign those as an accurate record of that meeting? Can I have a proposer, please? I've got Councillor Fredericks and I've got Councillor Heinrich as a seconder. Could we just have a show of hands, please, to accept those?
Okay, yep.
Okay, thank you for that. Item 5, items of urgent business. I'm not aware of any.
None received.
Item 6, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest that anybody needs to raise in relation to today's agenda business? I see no hands. Thank you. Moving on to item 7, petitions from members of the public. I'm not aware of any.
Again, none received.
Thank you. Item 8, consideration of any matter referred to the committee by a member. Again, I'm not aware of any.
None received.
Thank you. Item 9, responses of the council or the cabinet to the committee reports or recommendations. I'm not aware of any, but do you have any, Matt?
Again, I don't think there's any kind of substantive responses warranted from the last meeting. No.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on then to item 10. Item 10 is the car park income data, which covers a period from July to July 19 through till September 20. And this matter arose out of a recommendation in the minutes of our last meeting when we considered the incomes, fees and charges matter, and we had a question which led to a recommendation which has now led to this report. So this report, I believe, is introduced by Councillor Seward. Over to you, Councillor Seward.
Thank you very much, Nigel, and good morning, members. Some interesting data. Clearly, in the first quarter of this year, our car park income was, 5 or 10% of what it was forecast to be. We've recovered quite a bit of that in the government scheme to recover losses for fees and charges. So this is the period from July to September. As members that have been on the council for a number of years will know, historically, about 75% of the council's car parking income has come from car parks in Cromer, Sheringham, Holt and Wells. The inland towns have not been big income earners in relation to car parking charges. That trend, if you like, existed and continued to a certain extent between July and September, but there were changes. And what I think these figures actually show is that car parks that were by the coast, some of them have had historically high levels of income, looking at Weybourne and also looking at the smallish unmade car park at Cart Gap on the south side of Haysborough. And I think that reflected the number of visitors we had here between July and September. There was one or two changes where we've had car parks like the main one in Cromer where there was testing. We had we had some free car parking in Holt in July. Those figures obviously are reflected and are down. But the car parks in Fakenham and in North Walsham in the inland towns, the income generated there was less than it was in the previous year. So that is the sort of scenario, Chairman. It's really up to yourselves and your committee now to comment and to ask questions on it. But as I say, I started off by saying some interesting data, and that's where I'll end.
Thank you for that, Councillor Seward. Just before I open it up to questions, our recommendation from the last meeting, there were two parts to it. One was looking for additional information on parking numbers, and you've provided that amply, and you've spoken about that. The second part was to determine whether any benefit had been gained from offering limited free parking, because that was sort of part of the issue that was raised, and I'm not able to see that in the report. So can you direct me to the part of the report which deals with the second part of the recommendation, please? I see Mr.
Yes,
Black,
I think
you've got
Steve
your hand.
Burns is probably best placed to answer that, Jim.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman, members. I think the question that was asked for the last meeting was if moving forward the council was able to offer any free parking in support of COVID recovery. I don't think it is possible to measure on the basis of the experience how free parking does contribute in terms of whether the limited provision of free parking is a significant generator or positive outcome for any location. That's a subjective decision and needs to be considered in the context of the council's wider budget. When the fees and charges were set or presented to you at the last meeting, Councillor Seward said that it wasn't the council's intention to propose any changes to car parking charges in the forthcoming financial 2021-22 financial year. Car parking income does support a large element of the council's discretionary expenditure. Choices that we have in terms of the amount we spend on public conveniences, street cleansing and promenade cleansing, blue flag beaches and those sort of things. So if you make a choice to offer a reduction or offer any extended periods of free parking, that would significantly impact upon the council's corporate ability to provide other services and infrastructure across the district, but that is a choice that is available to the council. But I don't think it is possible for us to scientifically or measure with any robust analysis the benefit of any free car parking periods. We know that obviously people would say that free parking would allow more people to spend time in town centres, but there are other management issues that would arise if you go for free parking across the board. People who work in town centres often park closest to the town centre, which means people would have further to walk and all of those sort of issues. So I think the Cabinet's recommendation as presented last time was that we would maintain the existing car parking charging policy for 2021-22, not make any increases, and the information that's presented to you today is contextual to demonstrate the change that we did see during this current year, particularly during the peak months where there was that differential increased takings in the car parks in the coastal areas and a reduction in against historic levels in the market towns. So to some extent that might be because there was free parking offered. There's been a change in the management regime at Miller's Walk in Fakenham. That was previously a private car park which offered 2 hours free parking, but we received a number of complaints over many months, and the town council did, that there was a very strict regime of enforcement there, and so many people did park on district council car parks. We've taken over the management of that car park on behalf of the private sector and are paid a management fee for that. So I think that free parking may have seen a reduction in Fakenham of some of our charged for car parks, and we, as part of the social distancing measures in North Walsham town centre, where the marketplace managed queues and vehicular conflict, we've provided 24-hour free parking spaces on Bank Loke, and that may have contributed to some of the reduced takings in North Walsham for paid for parking. But I think the bottom line is that there has been a difference between the performance of coastal car parks during the current year relative to inland towns. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you for that, Mr. Black. Just to summarise, what you're saying in essence is that there is no objective evidence to demonstrate that reducing either free or reduced parking fees at any of our car parks results in either an improvement in local economic activity, i.e. people being encouraged to use the retail facilities and so forth to a greater extent, or indeed that the reduced fees are more than made up or are made up in terms of greater use of the car park. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's a complex picture. In all of our towns, in all of the inland towns, there are short stay parking on supermarket car parks, which are intended to provide linked trips, so people can exercise a degree of choice if they want to pay to park in North Walsham for up to 2 hours. There are supermarket car parks. The same is true in both Stelham and Fakenham. That's less clear in coastal towns. Obviously, Morrison's is a fair step from Cromer High Street in that regard, but there are other drivers in those coastal towns in terms of long stay visitors, which we don't see in the inland towns so much.
Thank you. Is there any reason then why the report doesn't cover that aspect of the recommendation?
No, I don't think so. No. It's an oversight on my part if there is. I thought the issue was what information you requested in terms of understanding that detail. I didn't appreciate you wanted specific commentary on that.
Well, that was the second part of the recommendation. In fact, that was the thrust of the recommendation, really. But anyway, we are where we are, and what you've presented in terms of information, I think, is quite interesting and illuminating with regard to where the greatest activity in income generation is with respect to the car parks. So thank you for that. I'll open it up then for questions from members.
See, Councillor Heinrich. Oh, sorry, Councillor Fredericks. Yep.
Councillor Fredericks.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm surprised to learn that we don't actually, sorry, the dog started now, that we don't actually start pushing or publicising our permits that residents can actually buy, because they're such a cheap alternative and really handy. Is there any headway or merit in doing that? Because obviously that would give us income, and we could rely on that income then, can't we, into the budget? But is there any way that we can start publicising that more and making that more accessible to our residents? Thank you, particularly the ones that work. Thank you.
Who'd like to respond to that?
I'm happy to respond to that. They do represent very significant value for money. So if people work in town centres, it's £204 for ability to park in the majority of our car parks, both inland and on the coast. So that represents less than 60 pence a day across the year. And you can use them at weekends and not just in terms of employment if you work in the town centre. Okay,
thank you for that. Councillor Fredericks.
I was thinking as well of the seasonal ones as well, because they're remarkably brilliant value, that we could publicise those, because obviously we've seen an increase in people wanting to go to the beach for leisure. They're an amazing value. How much are they? About 20 quid or something? You know, it's a wonderful opportunity if we could actually offer that to our residents and holiday makers, perhaps next year or whenever we come out of this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Heinrichs.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, a couple of things I take from this data. The first is that very heavy demand on the coastal car parks. And I've come across in other tourist areas a situation where the charges for beachside car parks are raised quite significantly during the peak summer season in order to capture the tourist pound. And since the tourist tax is not possible, to get something back from the cost of tourists by charging a little bit more doesn't seem unreasonable to me, especially if our residents can get the cheap permits, as Councillor Fredericks has said. I've seen it in East Devon, and I wonder whether we ought to be looking at that. I'm also concerned that we need to review at some point the free parking option in our market town centres. Not necessarily as it is now. I'm thinking more of a shorter term, 1 hour free in a slightly greater number of spaces than perhaps we've had previously. We've got some models now based on our response to COVID. So we've possibly want to look there. I'm not suggesting we try and make any changes this year. We've agreed the charges and I'm more than happy with that. But I would like to maintain an overview of the situation. We have no idea where this is all going. we may find that next 2, 3, 4 years, there is a much higher preponderance of staycations rather than foreign trips, in which case we're going to have that much heavier demand. I wonder whether, therefore, I could recommend that we maintain an ongoing review and evaluation of car park usage and income, and that includes a comparison with other coastal authorities, and we review our charging policies later in the year based on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Housden?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I'm sort of got a rather more positive view on it, and I wondered, given the increased usage on the coastal resorts, whether we should not be trying to find other locations which we could open up as car parks, even if they're on the temporary seasonal basis, whether we talk to local farmers, landowners, whatever, because obviously it's a source of significant revenue. Excuse me. And given the current situation, obviously people will probably be holidaying more in this country than abroad, and we should be taking advantage of it.
Good point. Thank you. Anybody want to respond to that? Councillor Blaithwaite?
Yes, there is a question of tourist overload. Local communities are actually being swamped by the tourists, and to encourage even more tourists might not be a step in the right direction for our ratepayers as opposed to our visitors.
Good point. Thank you for that. Does any officer want to make any comment on that point?
We have this year seen the opening of a car park at Bacton. That's a leased arrangement from the landowner, with the council making some investment and then paying an annual rental, and then receiving income from that arrangement. There is a wish from the community in Walcott for there to be better parking there, because most parking in Walcott is on street on the main seawall, and because of the pressures this year, a local landowner did bring forward a seasonal car park to manage the level of demand that was seen in that location. The parish council has been having discussions with us about whether a permanent solution can be found, but we haven't been able to identify a suitable site which is deliverable within reasonable timescale.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. Any other questions? If there are no other questions, there are, I think, 3 recommendations that might arise from this. The first is that we should put more, or recommendation that we should consider making better efforts to promote the annual and seasonal permits for car parks. The second, regarding continuing a review of car parking charges and performance of car parks across the district. And the third recommendation, and I'll not put this any more than a neutral one, that we should review opportunities for expansion of car park facilities where it is appropriate. And I think that recognises the points both made by Councillor Housden and Councillor Blaithwaite. Where there is an opportunity, then we ought to do so, but clearly that decision is one that would be taken into account what the benefit was to tourists as against the possible problems that might arise to residents, and whether it was appropriate in all the circumstances. Councillor Withington, you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Chair. I've got new speakers, so I'm not sure. Can everyone hear me at the right level?
I can.
First time I've used them, so it all seems a bit strange at the moment listening through this. First of all, can I thank the officers for putting together this information? As Eric said, it's got some fascinating info in it, and that's not a statement that I thought I'd find myself saying, that car parking information was fascinating, but how times have changed. But I think I'm really in favour of this idea of continuing a review of it, because I think it is such a significant part of our income, and as Steve mentioned, for that discretionary expenditure in a tourist area, that's really significant. So I'm in agreement with Councillor Housden in terms of, I think that review needs to include looking at how we can widen opportunities where possible. But I think I would very much like to see how we can use this review to support our independent town centres. The latest figures from Google Footfall show that there's been a 61% reduction in footfall. Now, it's obvious because people aren't coming and we're staying local, but that still, I think, is going to continue for some time. Even with the vaccine coming in, I think there's going to be people who are concerned about coming into high streets, etc., for some time. And our high streets have lost that resilience that they did have. And I think we are quite lucky in North Norfolk that our town centres are on the whole quite resilient, or were quite resilient. And I would like to see if there's a way that we can really encourage that. And we've got such fantastic town centres. So if there's some way that can be built into that recommendation, without saying any promises. I understand your use of the word neutral, Councillor Dixon, but I think it would be good if we could be seen to be trying to support the town centres. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I think what you're expressing is a view that I'm sure is shared by many, if not all, councillors across our district. I think it is perhaps an aspiration at this sort of stage, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But I'm not sure that we can put that in too tangible a terms. But let's see if we can't incorporate that in a recommendation. So maybe we've got 4 points then that we want to highlight from this, and we'll take that last point as being one which perhaps is a bit more of an aspiration rather than a specific. Can we, sorry, Councillor Pearce?
Yeah, it's just thinking as a member, obviously an interested member. Has anybody ever looked possibly at having a two-tier system for higher charges at the coast and lower charges for inland town centres to try and attract people from the coast to our inland town centres, namely, you know, North Walsham, Aylsham, Holt, etc., Bakerham? It's just a thought. Has anybody sort of seriously looked at that?
Do we have an officer comment on that?
Right. Well, Chairman, as you're probably aware, there is a two-tier system already. If you look at the existing charges, certainly in some of the coastal areas, they're higher than they are in Fakenham and North Walsham. So it's already there.
It's detailed in paragraph 2.2 of the report.
That's right.
The charging structure that the council does have in place. So inland towns are cheaper than the coast, and because of that issue around coastal towns in terms of Sheringham and Cromer are high streets and local service centres for their communities as well as being tourist destinations, there is a two-scale charge there around resort and coastal charges. And the charges in the coastal car parks are the long stay, beach, amenity, largely tourist, whereas the resort car parks are a balance of both tourism and local high street, local residents spend. But again, as Councillor Fredericks has said, for local people, there is considerable value in terms of the season ticket arrangements that the council operates.
Okay, thank you for that. Are you satisfied?
Yeah, okay, it was just thank you for that, Mr. Chairman, and for the officers and Councillor Seaward. It's just the fact that it's nice to see it's there. I know it was there, but the point is, you know, we've got to try, as we're doing this morning, to look at the tourist map and look at the tourist footfall and look at the tourist thing. I take it this is under review each year or each time now that we're going to put this through, that this all this continues straightforward, you know, as per it is now.
Okay, thank you. So we got 4 recommendations, and rather than ask for 4 separate proposers and seconders, I wonder if anybody would be prepared to make a proposal on a composite basis for 4 of them. Would that be a sensible way forward, Matt?
Yeah, I see Liz had her hand up. Are you proposing, Liz?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Withington. A seconder for that then, please. Thank you, Councillor Heinrich. Okay, so with respect to those 4 recommendations, would you indicate your support for those by raise of hand, please?
Okay, that looks unanimous amongst committee members.
Thank you. Right, so that concludes item 10. Moving on then to item 11, which is the 21-22 base budget and projections for 22-23, 23-24, and the medium-term financial strategy. Councillor Seawood, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Right, just in terms of dealing with the 21-22 budget and that part of the report, can I just emphasise this is very much work in progress. This is there's still things to be finalised, not least the fact we're not able to finally determine council tax collection by law until I think it's the end of the week. There is always a consultation on the local government financial settlement, and that won't be known, as you will appreciate, Chairman, until early February. And there is still time now for further discussions to balance up this budget in terms of what might actually be in it at the end. So that's where we are at the moment. It's work in progress. At the moment, we have a balanced budget for 21-22. So it's really for the committee, if they have views or suggestions where we are at the moment, then of course they are welcome. In relation to moving forward to future years, clearly that's set out in Appendix A on page 29. I think if you actually look at it, you will find, if you look at the net cost of services for 2021-22, and you look again at the figures for 22-23, it's not so much the net cost of services increases which is our problem. Our problem essentially is uncertainties in relation to the level of central government support, given the almost inevitable fact that the reviews over the fair funding review and business rates have had to be deferred in the light of the pandemic that we're facing. But it's that loss of uncertainty over central government support that leads to these deficits at the moment. It is very much a worst case scenario. I think there will be some adjustments and changes as we move forward, but it's very difficult to know when they will come in and what they will be. So that's really all I wish to say by way of introduction. Lucy Hume is here today and can answer detailed technical questions. Steve Blatch is also here. So, Chairman, I leave it to you and the committee.
Thank you, Councillor Seawood. Can I just clarify something? We have on our work programme 2 items for today's meeting. First is the draft budget, which you've spoken about in fine detail. The second is the medium-term financial strategy, and they were 2 specific pieces of work. It does seem to me that we've kind of combined those into this report, but I have to say that other than a specific mention on page, I think it's 26, paragraph 5, I don't see very much with regard to the medium-term financial strategy. I take your point about the projections of the general account, which we've already spoken about for the years leading up to 25, but I don't see any other mentions of the medium-term financial strategy. Can you point me to, maybe I'm missing something?
Chairman, I think probably Lucy Hume can best explain that situation to you at the moment.
Okay, Officer Hume, then please.
Morning, members. Yeah, so the medium-term financial strategy will come forward in full in February alongside the main budget report. So what you have today is more kind of the highlights and the risks. So it's not separately billed as a medium-term financial strategy, but a lot of what we focus on in that strategy is around the risks to the forecasts and those future years figures, which is what is we've attempted to do in section 2.2. I'm not sure what page that is in your pack, but that's assumptions and sources of uncertainty. But as I said, the more full medium-term financial strategy will come forward in February alongside the budget report. So this is very much a kind of a high-level kind of flavour of what's to come, if that makes sense.
So that's why it's a somewhat lightweight in terms of content as far as the medium-term financial strategy is concerned. All right. So that's just correct. To clarify that, then, this really is all about the draft budget and pre-scrutiny of it. And although there is a forecast there of the budgets leading forward, we have yet to address the matter of for the medium-term financial strategy as a topic on its own right.
Yes, correct. So I would, the medium-term financial plan also looks at potential strategies to address the future year's deficits, and that is included within the papers that will come forward in February. So some of the content that you might expect to see will be in that future paper. Okay,
thank you very much for that. I think just before I throw it open to questions, I think it would be right to say that we certainly welcome the forecast balanced budget for 21-22, but I'm sure members will have some questions in relation to that, because I'm sure, as the saying goes, the devil is in the detail. So let's throw it open for questions and see where we go. Questions, please. Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and indeed thank you to Officer Hume for the report we got presented to us today. A few points I would like to bring up, if I may. COVID is mentioned as a risk in there, but there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of detail in terms of how that may affect the finances going forward. So far today, we've been fortunate the government has largely come to the rescue to make up shortfalls in this current financial year, but we certainly can't assume that will necessarily be the case going forward. So I think when we next see the report, I'd like to see some more detail on that if we can. Also, I note that there is a significant depletion in reserves, and I know that's been known for some time. It's going down from about 8, I think on page 20, one of the pages in there, 26, beg your pardon, 23, states it's going down from 18.8 million to 14.5, so that's a reduction of over 4 million. Which is a great concern, which sort of leads me to my next point, that I don't see anything in here about savings proposals or indeed any proposals to invest to save. Now, I think that's something that's key looking going forward. You have already pointed out the lack of any detail around the medium financial term strategy. I know on Monday, Officer Hume gave a very detailed and articulate presentation to prepare us for this meeting, but in there she pointed out the fact that in previous years it has always been the case that going forward for 2 or 3 years the council has always forecast a significant deficit because a lot of items there are sometimes difficult to estimate for, but when it actually gets into the year itself, those deficits disappear and we ended up actually with a surplus. And I know, Mr. Chairman, you tackled Councillor Seward on the same issue in the last full council meeting. I have a concern that that sort of approach can potentially lead to some complacency. It will always be all right on the night, so we don't need to sort of forecast or try to do anything to plan for that, which comes back to the point I was making about savings proposals and proposals that we can make to see perhaps generate some more income. So I would like to have some thoughts on that, please, if we may, when we get to sort of responses from possibly Officer Hume or Councillor Seward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. You've raised several points there, and I wonder if Councillor Seward, would you like to sort of unpack some of those and respond to those?
No, yes, John. Can I just say to start that I'm not complacent about moving forward. I'm neither pessimistic nor optimistic in terms of how I've approached the finances in the last 12 months in what is an unprecedented situation, and I adopt the same approach moving forward. It's almost impossible to guess at times quite how this pandemic will come to a conclusion and what the financial implications will be. But I am aware of the challenges going ahead. I think you've said to me in the past that the scope for being able to get through on the night or to balance the books without having to find even more significant savings and maintain services is getting more difficult. That is correct, and that's one of the reasons why once we've got through this budget exercise as an early piece of work, we will look at reviewing all our departments in terms of their costs and to see whether or not the costs that are actually involved in terms of meeting the corporate plan priorities are needed. So that, I think, is the first thing, that we will be making a much earlier start in terms of dealing with things in the future. What I think, and I would make a plea here, because this is something that will be made by, I'm sure, all council financial portfolio holders, is that the sooner we can have some certainty about the levels of government support, the easier it's going to be to plan moving forward. And I only make that point because it's just made consistently by other council financial portfolio holders across the board. In terms of reserves, I'm fairly comfortable with the slight reduction. We should not be holding earmarked reserves indefinitely for no reason. They are earmarked for a specific item of expenditure. But something like around £5 or £6 million of the earmarked reserves are for contingencies. Apart from the general reserve, there's some reserves held in terms of dealing with possible liabilities over benefit payments. And we have to keep those. So we have a very comfortable margin. And can I just say, when I listen both in to district council colleagues across the country, the district council network and elsewhere, some of those councils are in very grave difficulty with the small amount of reserves they have to cushion themselves moving forward. We're not in that position. I want to use our reserves to actually enhance and improve the services we provide to our residents. And I don't want to have to use them to just bail out the council in order to balance its books. So that's where we are. Now, if Lucy Hume's got something else to add, Lucy, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, I just want to add a couple of points, if I may. So regarding the specific references to COVID and the kind of the implications and risks for that in the report, I think, you know, we want to highlight the fact that because we don't have a definite end point to the pandemic, then that is a significant risk to the forecasts. Clearly, the government have been very generous in their kind of grant schemes, and they've been really diligent in monitoring our extra spend and our lost income and compensating us kind of largely for that, which is really positive. I think, you know, moving forward, there isn't a commitment to continue doing that into beyond the first quarter of next financial year. So we can sort of assume that that help will be forthcoming for that. But following that, because we don't have any sort of commitments to do so, I don't consider it prudent to assume that that support will continue. I mean, hopefully it will, and clearly, you know, we'll be lobbying for that, and any support members can give us on that will be hugely appreciated. But I mean, nobody has a crystal ball, and we're not sure about, you know, we're clearly in the middle of a second wave now, but you know, there's questions about the vaccine and how long that will take to come into effect. So there will be implications from COVID well into, I would have thought, the third quarter of next financial year. So we kind of wait to see what the issue is there. I can't provide a huge amount of specific detail in terms of the figures for how much I think that will affect the budget, because we just don't know what restrictions will be in place. I mean, the levels of restrictions will impact those figures. For example, I mean, car parks is a good example of that. If the restrictions are heavy and people aren't going to be travelling to exercise, for example, then the car park income will clearly go down. If the restrictions are slightly less heavy, then we might find that people are moving around the coast more for kind of staycations, and then our income will go up, as we kind of talked about in the last item. But because we don't know what is going to happen, that's why we have that in there as a risk. The savings proposals, yes, I completely take your point. So the reason there is nothing in there on specific savings proposals is because that budget is balanced without having had to implement a specific programme of savings. So obviously this committee and also staff within the council have put in a lot of effort to come up with ideas and suggestions for savings. So the finance team are currently working those up. So we're looking with managers to see the feasibility of those and how much money they could actually save us should we implement those. And we will do some form of consultation on that going forward. Now that isn't a quick process. And takes a lot of officer and member time. So we haven't been able to bring forward in a huge amount of detail the proposals that this committee gave to us. But as soon as we've had time to work through those, then those will come back. And a lot of the suggestions were kind of more long-term ideas, and some of them were around income generation as well. So because they are not sort of required for balancing the budget for next financial year, I thought it was more prudent to bring them back when we have some more detail to give you. So on reserves, just to really echo what Councillor Seward just said, you know, if you look at Appendix D is our reserve statement, and you can see the movements in those reserves there. I mean, largely the movement is in the earmarked reserves, and we do earmark reserves for a specific purpose, as I mentioned in the session on Monday. And you would expect to see earmark reserves go over the medium term. I think really I would be questioning if they aren't reducing, because you've then earmarked them from a purpose and you're not actually following through on that purpose and spending the cash. So I think yes, while a general decline in kind of contingency type reserves is worrying, it's less so when we're talking about earmark reserves. And if you look at the general reserve, I think that's quite a good indicator of the health of an organisation. If the general reserve is depleting rapidly, then that is a concern. And our general reserve is shown at the top of Appendix D, should you wish to look at that. And the decline in that is much smaller, and it is remaining above the minimum recommended balance throughout. So hopefully members can take some comfort from that. Excuse me. And then I think I wanted to talk about the session on Monday and those kind of future deficits. So in the session I mentioned that, you know, the reason we do the medium term planning is to flush out those deficits in future years, because it gives us time to then plan for how we're going to meet those. So, you know, in previous years, and we've had deficits kind of show up for maybe even the current year, you know, that has given us the time to actually work on the savings proposals and lobbying for extra funding, which is why we get to the position that we do when, you know, of a balanced budget. So it's no small amount of work and effort that goes into doing that. So I don't think there's a there's an air of complacency around, oh, well, we'll just, it will be fine when we get there, because I think that that just, it doesn't really highlight the amount of effort between those two positions. But I think it's just more to sort of reassure members that although there is a deficit in future years, we do have time before we get to that, and we do have some strategies to get to a balanced position when we get there. So although that those deficits are there, it gives us time to implement a plan, and that's what we're doing now. And as I said, the savings proposals will be key to that. And when they are sort of costed up, they'll be brought forward back to this committee. That won't be in time for the February budget papers, but it will be hopefully not too long after that, and I'll keep the committee updated as to where we are with it. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you for that, both of you. Councillor Cushing, do you wish to come back on that?
Just to thank Councillor Seaward and Officer Hume for their replies, very thorough replies to those points. I mean, at the moment, until we see more detail, it's obviously a debate and discussion that we will continue to have in the coming months anyway. So I'm happy with the response we've got so far today. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just then add a little bit, I think, to what has been said in terms of, you quite, I think quite rightly, this is a draft budget, and this is an opportunity for this committee to comment on some of the principles that are applied, rather than dwelling too much on the figures, because the figures, I'm sure, between now and presentation of the budget next month may well change, and that's well accepted. But I think on the general points that have been made, i.e. that the first half of the next financial year, I think there are reliable predictors that we will be dealing with COVID implications for the first half of the next financial year, which is a considerable part of that year. And I think, Councillor Seaward, you've indicated, and I think I agree with this, that central government has indicated support probably covering the first quarter of that year. Thereafter, I think for obvious reasons, the uncertainty around the support that central government will give, and any impact on the income streams, that's much harder to predict. And so therefore, isn't there a much greater level of uncertainty around the second quarter and possibly beyond the second quarter? And doesn't that then link with the point that Councillor Cushing made around savings? Shouldn't we be making efforts to come up with our savings proposals, even if we don't need to implement them? Shouldn't we have them prepared and on standby in order to give us an opportunity to address those possible deficits that could arise in the course of the year? I think that's the thrust of my concern from what's been raised, is that there is an opportunity here, and perhaps this is something which Cabinet might like to give consideration to. Any comment on that?
Look, I mean, if come the end of June, we're still in difficulties in relation to local authorities across the board, struggling with income and rising costs to deal with this pandemic, there's going to be a lot of squealing before then on central government to try and get some help. Now, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know quite how they will respond or react, but I think the first thing is that we have to look what happened this year, and there's a lot of local authorities at district level are in a lot worse position than we are, and they will be squealing, I'm sure, if this is what we're facing. So I think that's the first point. The second thing is the reason we're starting work quite early on in relation to looking at potential areas for savings is precisely to try and address the point that you are making, so that if we find ourselves in a situation towards the end of this calendar year where we are really struggling, that we are in a position to start implementing or doing things which can mitigate the deficit that we're facing in 21-22. There's not really a lot more I can say than that, because all of this is full of uncertainty. But let's see how we go. But I'm mindful of everything you say, and the reason we're starting some work early is precisely because of that. But also, I would expect if local councils are in a lot of difficulty by June, I think there's going to be enormous pressure on government to try and provide some further help.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Stewart. Obviously, the general point about other councils, you may well be right. However, our concern, of course, is this council, not others. The second point is that as far as the equation goes between uncertainty and contingencies, they are kind of on the two separate sides of the equation. Where you have uncertainties, and you're quite right, there are, you know, several of them, and they could swing by a considerable margin. That's where contingencies then are helpful in trying to iron those out. It is better to have them available and not use them than not have them available and need them to when it's too late. That I think is the point. Anyway, I think we've probably explored that as much as we reasonably can. I'm mindful a number of people lining up with questions. I've got Councillor Housden, and I've got 3 yellow hands on my screen as well. Councillor Housden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, many of us will have seen Keir Starmer's comments that the council tax rise should be deferred or postponed for this year. So my question really is quite difficult. Really, how much of an increase have we seen in support for council tax for members of or the public in North Norfolk District Council? That's my first part of the question. The second is that we've talked about the first, second and third quarters of the next financial year, but we haven't even come out of furlough yet. And when we come out of furlough, there's going to be a vast number of the population who, in my opinion, are actually going to be unemployed because the companies won't exist, or employers will just make people redundant, and therefore there's going to be more drain on the council tax. Now, I know we've just discussed the medium term, but there is an assumption in the medium term that the 4.95 increase on Band D can carry through. But even if it carries through and we're getting a drain from council tax and no government support, obviously it's going to be a further drain on the resources of the council. I know I've seen Sipford's statement, but it is quite a worry that the government aren't responding quickly enough to help out district councils. But once again, as you've just sort of highlighted, we do need to see where we can make savings, because this could hit far faster than the central government actually react. Thank you.
Right, well, just on the issue of what Keir Starmer has raised in council taxes, I believe the chairman will well recall, there was a period from 2011, I think it was, to 2016, where in order to assist councils not to increase council tax, we received a central government grant to compensate us. I presume that that's the kind of thing he's got in mind. Clearly, if that, Nigel, is offered to us, we will take it. But you know, it's not been offered to us as of yet. Our increase that to balance this budget at the moment is, well, it's the limit is 1.99% or £5, because we're in the lower quartile of district authorities, so therefore we can raise it by that. What we're raising council tax by, as things stand at the moment, and is what we're proposing is in fact less than either the police authority or the county council. In relation to, look, where you're moving forward, I take everything you're saying. There's not really a lot more I can add to what I've already replied to the chairman. other than to say that if in terms of collection rates, we are struggling given the kind of situation that you're indicating, then the government has allowed us to spread the recovery costs over a number of years, which will help us. But if you wanted a bit more detail on that, Lucy Hume can supply it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, so council tax support has risen significantly in North Norfolk over the last sort of year or so. I think we are mindful of the fact that when furlough does end, we are expecting that to increase, and that obviously has several impacts. So there's the increase of council tax support obviously reduces the amount of council tax income that we can collect, but also there could just be people who struggle to pay their bills because of lack of money coming in. So the bad debts are also likely to increase. So we have factored both of those elements in. In terms of the future years, when we've been sort of forecasting our council tax income, one of the things we look at is changes in the tax base. So that's kind of effectively the number of properties and the type of properties that we can levy tax on. So we look at changes over the different years. So we look at growth and new properties coming on stream, but we also look at things like anticipated discounts and council tax support. So we effectively reduce the tax base by a certain figure to account for some of that council tax support change. So that's what we have done as far as we're able to, looking at those future years. And we've made assumptions around how much that council tax support will increase and therefore how much the tax base reduces by. We are sort of part of a national benchmarking scheme around that does cover things like council tax and council tax support. So we look at the kind of the national picture and the increases in council tax support seen sort of across the country, but also take into account the local circumstances as well, and sort of balance the two up to come up with a projection. So the figures that are sort of in front of you today do include a kind of an increase in council tax support and therefore a reduction in the amount of council tax collectible. Now, obviously, depending on how long this situation goes on for and how quickly the economy recovers, those assumptions may be more or less correct when we get to it. But we have factored it in. I think the council tax increase that we have based this budget on is £4.95 on a band D, and that's we've done that in each year of that financial plan. I think while obviously it's not ideal to have to pass on extra charge to the taxpayer, central government as part of their settlement did assume that we would do that to take full advantage of the increase in core spending power. Obviously, it isn't ideal in a pandemic situation. I think if we were to look again at that decision, then we would be looking at potentially dipping into reserves to cover that shortfall. So it is a difficult decision to take, but it's one that ultimately will be made in February when the budget and council tax is set by members.
Fine, thank you very much for that, Lucy.
Okay, yes, thank you for that. I think at the heart of the points that Councillor Hairston makes, the 2 points really are: is it reasonable, fair and reasonable for council taxpayers, bearing in mind the situation that is likely to exist, particularly when furlough ceases, for them to be able to pay that council tax increase? And should we not be looking at the savings that might well be available to help us to balance the budget later in the year? So that's very helpful, thank you. I've got 3 yellow hands and I'm not sure the order in which the hands were raised. Can you help me on that, Matt?
Yeah, I think we've got Harry Blathwaite first, followed by Andrew Brown and then Liz Withington.
Okay, thank you. In that order then, please.
Yeah, I'm a bit disturbed by the bluer members of this committee being very pessimistic regarding the Brexit bounce. Surely we're all down, there's a big bonus coming down the road, isn't there? And regarding reserves, and contingencies. I think we might sound like a chap who stuffs his mattress with notes, banknotes, to sleep comfortably, rather than spending some on a new mattress.
Thank you for that. I think I'll probably pass on those comments. I'm not sure that Brexit is part of our agenda today, thankfully. Councillor Brown, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the welcome that you extended to me as a newly appointed member of this committee. Morning, everyone. I want to focus on something which is not featured in the service area budgets. In the section dealing with waste collection and disposal, it's disappointing that we are not noted as a council for our food waste recycling operation. I understand that the government some years ago encouraged, with central government grants, local authorities to carry out pilot projects to introduce food waste recycling. As long ago as 2008, our near neighbours Broadland, and I think sometime afterwards Kings Lynn and West Norfolk, have introduced a food waste recycling scheme, and it has proved extremely popular. We are in austere times, and I am mindful that this will impact potentially on our charges for council tax. So I would like, if possible, in an effort to decrease our carbon footprint, increase our recycling from, I think, the low 40% to the 50%. So we'd be moving into an increased volume of recycling, to commission a report from this committee to be brought back to look into the feasibility of, in later years, obviously not in the next financial year, of bringing in a food waste recycling scheme, and in so doing helping to reduce the methane production of food waste going to landfill, as it currently does, from its current level of estimated to be 6%. We were the first council to declare a climate change emergency. It is incumbent upon us to continue to improve our green credentials in the light of that. And I would therefore recommend that we seriously look at this as a future improvement to our service to our residents, by, as it were, popular demand from many of the residents that contact me. And I would recommend that you, Mr. Chairman, request a report to be brought back to this committee and possibly to be sent to Cabinet subsequently. In concluding, I would just like to thank the officers for their diligence in putting this report on the agenda together in extremely testing times, and I am very grateful to Lucy Hume and her team for the information laid before this committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. You've raised, I think, a very good point. I think it's a point that's been aired well before now. I'm mindful that in the preparation of the waste contract, that was one matter that was pretty central. And I think I probably don't want to say too much more, because I think, Mr. Blatch, you can probably respond in more comprehensive ways than I can with regard to the consideration of food waste collections.
Thank you, Chair. It was the subject of detailed consideration and I believe a costed option as part of the waste contract. So those issues have been considered. The government also issued a new waste strategy, and I think there was significant representation from a number of particularly rural local authorities where the cost of small food waste collections is very high relative to the benefits, but that I don't know the details, but it was considered in detail as part of the contract award for the waste contract, and I think it would be possible for officers to bring that information back in the way that Councillor Brown has requested.
Thank you. Councillor Brown, would you be satisfied if some of that material were resurrected and brought to the committee, and that may deal with much of what you've raised, and if it doesn't, then there may be further work that might be raised after that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and I would just comment on one aspect that Mr. Blatch has raised. In Broadland, in the area of Broadland District Council, the way the food recycling waste collection system was rolled out in the high density population areas initially, to make it more amenable in terms of the cost to the council of implementing the service, and then was further expanded when the successful delivery of that service was initially implemented. So there are ways and means of gradually introducing such a scheme to maximise the cost benefit analysis by the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that. Just to conclude that matter, I think your question, and it doesn't take any away from the importance of it, is probably more relevant to how the council responds to the climate emergency and what it might be able to do in reducing its carbon footprint. I'm not sure whether Councillor Seawood would necessarily see the possible increased costs of the waste contract as helpful in the preparation of his next year's budget and budgets thereafter. But I'll leave that point hanging. I think it's more relevant, to the carbon footprint agenda than the financial agenda at this point. Councillor Seawood, did you want to respond?
Chairman, I would love to introduce a food waste collection service across the district. It would significantly raise our recycling rates and be a major step forward on reducing emissions and under the climate change agenda. I'm quite content for a report to be brought back. It's not something we can do in this financial year, and we can look at the viability of the scheme and whether something is or is not possible. The Chief Executive has indicated that can be done, and I think that I don't have a problem with that.
Thank you. Okay, I've got Councillor Withington and I've got Councillor Mancini Boyle. I saw your hand was raised earlier on. So Councillor Withington first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to, again, the financial team for this comprehensive report. And I think given the circumstances we've been through, coming through with a balanced budget is an achievement in itself. I'm confident that our team have at the heart of our ethos for the District Council, making savings where possible at the heart of what we do. But I think they've also got and understand that our residents also feel it's important that services are retained. And I think that's what's significant about this budget, that it's an attempt to do both of those. Unfortunately, those of you who attended the LGA conference on budgets this over the last 2 weeks, there's been 2 of them, it was made very clear that it is a significant reduction in core spending for councils across the board, and that councils are expected to replace that funding through locally raised tax. And that's what Lucy was referring to as well, because she was also on those calls. So it is unfortunate that we're going down that road, and I think obviously if members aren't in agreement with that and feel that it's impacting on our residents, they should be encouraged through our local MP to ask him to support some lobbying on that respect, because it's obviously not good for our local residents. But the fact that we've used earmarked reserves, I think, should be seen as positive in some ways. It either means we're bringing projects to fruition, such as Splash, and we're moving money to where we can benefit our residents. And again, that's the purposes for what we're doing. And I don't feel this is anyway a budget which is complacent or not thinking for the future. I think it's, you know, a budget that's probably going to have to be a budget of its time, in that we are in a very unknown situation. I am really pleased, however, to see that, and through the work that we've been doing this year, to see that we've got this continual work on producing some revenue from commercial, and I was pleased to see how much was coming in from that, and you know, based on some of the things we've just taken on, that hopefully that will help us through next year as well. So I think it's actually a really positive budget. So thank you, Lucy and Eric.
Thank you, Councillor Withington. Just to clarify a couple of valid points that you've raised, and I know that most of us probably tend to think, when we think of savings, one of the first vulnerabilities I think that comes to mind is, will there be a reduction in services in order to fund those savings? That's quite natural, and often there is a link between one and the other. Let's be very clear about that, but there needn't be. And the other point that you made, which was income generation, in order to balance the budget and maintain services, you can either achieve that by income generation or making savings. And both of those are perfectly valid things to do in their own right. So the decision with regard to service levels is a separate one, and I think one that needs to be treated on the basis that, you know, you've already outlined. It is a matter that needs to be considered in the light of what residents want, and it's the question of savings and income really is one for us to consider as to how we best balance the budget. So just to kind of make that point.
I think I understand that, Chair. I think my point is that I'm confident that that is going to be done over this next year.
That's absolutely fine, and one shouldn't forget, of course, that this isn't a budget at the moment. It's a draft budget, and it's our opportunity to express any views that we might have that Cabinet might like to take into account before it produces the final budget, if you like, to be presented in February. So thank you for that. Councillor Mancini-Boyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify a few points for Councillor Brown. This issue was actually raised with the food recycling by myself about 6 months ago with Officer Hems. I questioned why it was not on the contract at the time, and he sort of said that it probably could be added on later on. And just to clarify, pretty soon I suspect the government will insist on it anyway. You alluded to Broadland. Broadland have a very different strategy, I think, sometimes to a lot of councils. They tend to prefer to give service over cost, which is why they did bring in, as you rightly said, this food recycling a long time ago, probably about 2 or 3 years ago now. And that's why they're doing it. They look at it that way. However, I think at the moment they will continue doing this, but they will be under the same pressures that we're under, and they may have to at some point not continue with it. So that's where that came about. And just to say that this is something that's been raised 6 months ago with Steve Hems when I brought it up with regard to the waste contract anyway. So just to clarify that.
Okay, thank you for that. Interesting though that topic is, as I pointed out earlier, it is aside from the budget, and I think might well give rise to a separate piece of work later in the year. Councillor Fredericks.
Thank you very much. Again, you know, it's a remarkable feat to balance the budget in these times. I just wondered if Eric or Lucy could remind us how much money NNDC receive from council tax. I know it's a percentage of what we receive is quite low, and what we pass on. So if you could just remind me of that, that'd be lovely. Thank you.
Well, I'll just start. It's for every pound that people pay in council tax, just about 10p or slightly under comes to the district council. The bulk of it, about 75% of it, actually goes to the county, but I'll leave Lucy to give more precise figures.
Yep, no, those are practically spot on. I think it's about 9.5p out of every pound that we get. So pretty close, Eric. And yeah, about 75 pence goes to the county, and I think that proportion is forever changing. And because the county council have greater flexibility over their council tax rises, we find that their share increases while everyone else's share goes down a little bit. So
yeah, and I mean, county councils by definition will take more of the council tax because of the nature of the services they provide, particularly adult social services and children's services. The other thing I think that's quite interesting, town and parish councils in some places have been raising their precepts quite significantly in recent years, and I think we've probably got one in our district where their precept and what they raise is more than the district.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we're probably all done by the looks of it. No further hands. I have one further question to ask, and that is, can you explain the extent to which this budget will be balanced by use of reserves? In other words, how much in terms of value are we taking out of either the general or the earmarked reserves to make the budget balance?
We're not taking any money at the moment out of general reserves to balance this. The only money that's being taken for reserves is what is already in the programme. So things like the Community Infrastructure Fund or the Big Society Fund, that was funded this year from reserves and remains the case given that we no longer get an income source for that. But the aim at the moment, Chairman, is that we will not be dipping into reserves to balance this budget. You'll have to wait until February to see whether we can maintain that position, but that's where we are at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that. I thought I saw somewhere in the report, and I'm struggling now to kind of see it. I thought I saw a decrease in the general reserves of something like 96k.
Lucy, can you just answer that? I can't, off the top of my head, I don't know what that 96k is for, but it's certainly not to balance the budget.
yeah, no, it's 86, I think, roughly. That's to fund a specific project, but I can't off the top of my head remember which one it is, but I can follow that up for you. But it's not to plug a gap in the budget. It's for a specific project.
Okay, so that is a project that's not covered by an earmarked reserve and is therefore being funded from the general reserves. Okay, I think you've clarified that there is no use of reserves, general or earmarked, in balancing this budget.
That's correct, Chairman, as of today.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, if we're all done then, what kind of recommendations do you want to make, if any, to Cabinet with regard to any further considerations in preparing the final budget? Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just think it's really just following up on the points that we really mentioned, and I think probably Officer Hume and Councillor C would have actually probably answered them anyway, but it's really actually requesting more information in terms of their views, in terms of the impact of the COVID on the council's income streams, and also probably a bit more scrutiny around the reserves, but also particularly I think we do want to have more detail, flesh out more detail on any savings proposals which may come in either impact in the coming financial year or certainly those going down the line, and also, as I said, any investment opportunities that may have been identified. I think those particular areas for me would sum it up nicely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Fredericks?
Perhaps we could recommend that Cabinet continue to lobby our MP for more certainty around government funding, because I guess it's it's really difficult to have certainty without the certainty of funding. So if we could just continue to strongly lobby, that would be, I think that would be a recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, Councillor Cushing.
Yeah, I do keep hearing this. I'd just like to remind all members of the committee, actually, the district is actually represented by 2 members of Parliament, one from North Norfolk and one from Broadland, and one from Broadland certainly covers the area that I represent as well. And I think we're very fortunate having 2 MPs there who are very serious in terms of lobbying government ministers, and I know from speaking to them they have day-to-day contact with them.
Okay, we've got 2 mentions there, which I wonder if we might be able to form into some kind of recommendation. A recommendation, let's just go to yours, Councillor Fredericks, which is basically a wish and perhaps a need to take some action to try and lobby for greater certainty with regard to central government funding. But of course, that is reliant on central government in responding to that. But there is something that we can do ourselves, which is the counterbalance to that, i.e. if the government doesn't come up with the necessary sort of support, particularly after the programme that's currently running comes to an end, then it comes back to whether or not we should not do more work to come up with some savings, contingency savings that can be relied upon should there be a gap open up in the course of the year. And I think that's points that have been made by Councillor Cushing and Councillor Housden. You may have, there may be others with some concerns around that. I just wonder if there's sort of 2 recommendations that could be made there. Councillor Housden?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I certainly think we've got to keep our eye very, very carefully on the ball of savings. That's crucial, and it's going to be crucial for not just the next financial year, but certainly the year after that and beyond. So I think savings is a crucial factor.
Thank you for that. So bearing in mind, this is pre-scrutiny. This is about ideas or proposals that we think might be helpful in enabling Cabinet to come up with a robust and a budget that will withstand the kind of uncertainties that we have talked about. So it's really a pre-scrutiny. Councillor Withington.
In regard to what Councillor Housen's just said in terms of savings, the team have made it clear that that's what they intend to do. Perhaps our role might be to put in a timescale so that it comes back to us and we know then that it's going to be covered, which they've already said they're going to be doing as part of the medium-term plan is coming back to us in February, and then the savings would be shortly afterwards. Was I correct on that, Lucy? Have I read that correctly?
Yes, that's right.
So would it be then suitable to put in a timescale for us to for when the savings will be coming back to us and considered?
I'm sure we can do that. Clearly, the wording of the recommendation is up for us to decide. I think probably the first part is a fairly straightforward one. Councillor Fredericks' one is one where we would wish to see efforts made to ensure greater certainty over central government funding. So words to that effect. With regard to savings, I think that we can probably encapsulate that in words of a kind that we would like to see more efforts made in developing savings opportunities, particularly for the period after the government support comes to an end. So that's in the next financial year onwards. And I think that would then leave the matter of fine tuning the timing to whenever those needs might arise. But I think it's the principle of having those kind of savings opportunities on the stocks, if you like, so that you can open or close the tap as you require them. It's about the prudence behind that. Councillor Withington?
Yes, I can see the merit in that recommendation, but I think the use of more effort required, I think is a little bit derisory towards the officers' efforts that they're putting in. Would it be more appropriate to use the term continued efforts? I think that would be indicative of what's actually the reality of the situation.
You might well be right, Councillor Withington. I wouldn't like to be held. The words that come off the cuff are simply that. And I think often we will reflect on whether they might be adjusted one way or another. The point I think that I'm really making is that we would like to see efforts made towards generating savings that will be available to us in the coming financial year rather than subsequent years, so that it plugs the gaps that may open up if those contingency situations arise. Okay, are we have some measure of agreement about that? A proposer for those two recommendations, please. Councillor Cushing, Councillor Fredericks to second. Could you then indicate your support by a show of hands, or do you want to vote on this one, Matt?
I can do a roll call. Seems a formal recommendation to Cabinet, so I'll just go through the names. So Councillor Dixon?
For.
Councillor Withington?
For.
Councillor Blathwaite?
For.
Councillor Brown?
For.
Councillor Fisher? Sorry, Peter, is that a for? Sorry, I don't know if we've lost. Peter, are you there? Okay, we'll move on. Oh, where are we? Councillor Fredericks?
For.
Councillor Heinrich?
For.
Councillor Housden?
For.
Councillor Mancini Boyle?
For.
Councillor Varley?
For.
And Councillor Cushing?
For.
Peter, were you in favour of that? Sorry. So you've got your microphone on now. Don't know if he can hear us. So anyway, that's certainly all in favour. Sorry, Nigel, I think you're muted.
Yes, thanks very much indeed for that. Moving on then to item 12, which is the draft communication strategy for 2021. I'm aware that Councillor Buttercover isn't with us today. Councillor Seawood, are you deputising in that role, or is somebody else taking that on?
Well, you've got the Chief Executive and you've got Joe Ferrari here today, and clearly I've seen it, had been involved in discussions on it, so I'll pass it straight over to them to introduce and for the committee to discuss.
Okay, thank you for that. I can see that Mr. Blatch is in the starting blocks, so over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, Mr. Ferrari is here to be able to outline the headlines of the revised communication strategy for you today. He has delivered a series of workshops and presentations to members in getting to this position. So I would propose that Joe talks you through the proposals and takes any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Ferrari, over to you.
Well, good morning, Chairman and members. The draft communication strategy revisits and reviews the previous communication strategy, which was set down in 2017 for the Council. And the draft 2021 strategy sets out 8 key proposals, which, if implemented, would in summary provide the following key benefits. Firstly, to improve the audience and reach of the Council's various communications platforms from its current rather modest base. Modernize the content that we produce on our channels through the increased use of video and smarter use of social media generally. Improve interaction with our key external regional media outlets, which remains a critical ongoing objective for any council and this council as well. Constructively review internal communications at the council, which are currently carried out by a number of methodologies, again established around 2016, 2017. Significantly improve our coverage of full council meetings on our own channels, which is an area where we can make some fairly swift improvements if approved. Provide more effective support for members and officers when they conduct media work, so be that through training and or briefings before any interviews that may arise for members or officers. Maintain the highest standards regarding ongoing COVID communications, which delivery has been good so far, but it remains a critical function of the communications team at the council. And finally, to improve the council's graphic design output and resourcing model. The graphic design is currently outsourced to a number of external agencies, and our proposal is to look at the appointment of an in-house graphic designer. As Mr. Blatch mentioned, the draft strategy has been discussed and amended via a number of internal stages involving senior officers and members to date. And I now welcome any input or questions from members of this committee before it goes forward to Cabinet for final approval.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Ferrari. Open to questions then. I've got Councillor Mancini-Boyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Don't worry, Joe, this isn't going to be an awkward question. I'd just like to thank you, first of all, for the very informative course that you put down a couple of weeks ago. It was really, really helpful to a lot of us, and a very good report that you put forward. And I'd just like to congratulate you. You seem to have a very good grasp on comms. Thank you for that.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. Councillor Fredericks and then Councillor Withington.
Hello, thank you, Joe. Fantastic that you've taken the reins, and it's evident on social media that we can see that you're really using those channels well. I'm just wondering about sponsoring those adverts, actually paying for the adverts, rather than just putting it on our own channels, because as members, we all should be sharing that on our social media. But I'm just wondering if there's scope to do a bit more paid posts, say on Facebook, so it goes around the district, so that each post is actually seen by every user on social media, rather than just relying on the members to share it. And if that would come with obviously a cost. So if that could be worked out, and I think that would be a really good way of boosting our social media presence. Thank you.
Absolutely, Councillor Fredericks. So we do have some headway within the existing comms budget for use on digital development, and we have begun to look at promotion of a few key social media posts. The actual rate to promote an individual post on either Facebook or Instagram is relatively low, and therefore it's quite cost effective to use, particularly for perhaps really important COVID messaging, where we want to make sure that that lands with as many people as possible. And the more people that receive individual messages, the way that social media works is that then leads usually to an increase in the number of followers that you have. And so it has a kind of cyclical benefit, which is that you not only reach people with that individual message, but you begin to build the channel's overall audience as you move forward. So absolutely a good point, and we are looking at that now.
Thank you for that. Councillor Withington? You're on mute at the moment.
Hi, thank you, Joe. And again, I'd like to reiterate how useful the course that you ran was, and how it is evident that we're seeing your benefits of your talents on social media already, and the team as well. So brilliant. It links slightly to what Wendy was going to say here, that I think the members have a huge role that they can play here, and I don't see, for me, enough in this strategy that emphasises that. And I don't know whether that can be worked in so that, you know, we can build in that role of members and really get members actively promoting and sharing and posting themselves as well. But comes with that, you know, obviously training then's needed for members, and also support the members in how you do that and how you manage some of the effects that you might have, shall we say. And my second point is, I do wonder whether the social media targets are challenging enough. I think I'm sure we could achieve far more than that with your talents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your faith in our collective talents to build that. Taking your second point first, if I may, the targets are I think reasonable based on the low numbers we're starting with. So they imply 40 to 50% growth in 1 year for each of the three main social channels, which would be a very solid move forward. We currently reach a combined total of around 11,000 people, 11 to 12,000 people out of a population of approximately 110,000. And if we achieve the proposed objectives, that number will jump to 20,000 plus in a year. So it's a case of trying to find a balance between a stretch set of objectives for the team, but also not demoralize us by setting objectives that are unreachable. The main way to build social channels is to have more engaging content, and a council is by its nature restricted perhaps from some of the content that private organizations might be able to consider build audience quickly. Nevertheless, we do think that with video, which is absolutely critical to modern communications, which my colleague Felix in the communications team has led some early improvements on, and that's something we're looking as a team to really enhance moving forward, and the use of infographics to explain some of the perhaps more impenetrable or denser information that's really important to help the public to appreciate and understand. So I think those things will help us to move towards those targets, and I'd love to stretch that further in 2022 and really build those numbers. And in relation to your first question regarding members, you're absolutely right. Members do have a critical role to play in the full policy or the full strategy document. We have recommended a review of the current media policy, which applies to members and officers, which is not just a kind of you mustn't do this type policy, but should also be a policy which highlights and encourages positive use of social media by both members and officers. And finally, yes, I can certainly include in the strategy moving forward to the Cabinet for consideration more wording that puts that down in black and white to outline exactly what kind of support we can give to members and what we'd be hoping for from them to help the council spread its messaging further afield.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to query the proposal to bring in an internal graphic designer. If you're using an external company, then in theory, you'll have access to somebody or a company that can do work 52 weeks a year. By bringing in just one person internally to do that, then clearly there is a risk that when they're on holiday or if they're incapacitated for any reason, then you're going to lose that ability.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. So weighing up the pros and cons of external versus internal, each solution arguably brings some challenges with it. So ideally, you would have a team of multiple graphic designers, budget permitting, to offset the issue that you mentioned, in that you would have shifts then and availability to cover for each other. However, the current model, which has been in place, I think, for a year or two since the previous internal graphic designer left the council, has seen departments use a variety of external agencies at considerable cost to the council. It also brings with it a lack of consistency across design work. So if you use different design agencies, they obviously have different thoughts and styles about how they present their graphic design work, and that can lead holistically over the council's entire graphic design input to a lack of consistency, a lack of adherence to brand guidelines, and also present some internal communications challenges in that when you have an internal graphic design resource, when people are working normally in the office, which obviously isn't the case at the moment, they can consult more easily with that graphic designer as they embark on a project. When you're engaging with an external agency, the communication tends to be slower because it has to be via email or by telephone. You can't just look over their shoulder and see what they're working on and make amends on the hoof. And so it's a little bit less flexible than having an internal resource. In terms of cover, external agencies don't work over Christmas sometimes as well. So they don't provide 24/7, 365-day-a-year coverage unless you pay a premium for that coverage. And so for the reasons I've outlined and also for cost efficiency, I would still propose that we consider an internal graphic designer at a level to be agreed by the relevant committees and with the assistance of our HR colleagues in terms of grading and cost.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Housden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just looking at the projections, but I'm also looking at the Facebook page where the maximum people of likes has been 20, and that was for Happy New Year. So it's all very well having, 4,824 people follow this, but when only 7 or 8 are actually looking at the post, it doesn't sort of bode too well. So firstly, my first question is, broadband's not particularly brilliant in Norfolk, so that's going, how are we going to sort of improve that situation to reach a wider audience? And is there any means out of this communication strategy of actually creating a positive income flow?
Thank you. Very, very, very good questions. So yes, you're right. The current level of engagement, particularly looking at likes, etc., on Facebook and Twitter, isn't as high as we would like. And again, it's a cyclical consideration. The number of engagements and likes that you get on content typically depends on the level of content that you produce, how contemporaneous it is. So are you amongst the first people to talk about a particular issue, or are you actually coming in second or third compared to external media who may already have discussed such an issue, and so you're not as engaging? There are some challenges because the best engaging content is also sometimes the most controversial and or stimulating of debate, which from our neutral perspective is not always easy to do. But if we build the base audience, the number of likes will improve. If we implement other measures, which the paper outlines, to stimulate discussion through our content, so not just to say this is happening, but to say this is happening and what do you think, which we currently don't do and hasn't been the policy previously, then we will get more engagement, more likes and more interactions. In terms of generating revenue from the council's communications channels, it's not been a primary consideration of my paper, because I think the first and overriding priority is to build the audience, because at the moment the audiences are so small that the income generation possibilities are rather limited. So we do need to prioritize for a year audience build. Once you have larger and more compelling audiences, subject to some rather onerous restrictions from Twitter and Facebook as platforms as to what you can and can't do, there may be some opportunities to explore sponsorship, or at least a more focused strategy to use those channels to promote the council's other revenue generating areas. But to do all of that, you first and foremost need the audience, and the audiences at the moment are too small to effectively do that, in my opinion.
Thank you for that. Can I just ask, Mr. Chairman, may I just ask something else as part of our communication strategy? And I know we're going to come on to this subject as the next item on the agenda, but I've just Googled Splash Leisure Centre, date published 4th of March 2020. You know, that is part of a communication strategy which has been lacking for the last year. And, you know, it's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I understand all of those. I use them. But the website is equally part of that communication strategy, and it is desperately out of date. And, you know, the whole of this process needs to be fast. You've just said, you know, we don't want to be repeating facts that are out on Sky or BBC. We want to be ahead of the game, not very nearly a year behind it. So to my mind, communication strategy has got to be fast, on the ball and sharp. And, you know, we haven't been. And obviously, as part of this, I would like to see that as a key element. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Ferrari, do you wish to respond to that?
Yes, again, the website, there has been content placed on the website about Sheringham Leisure Centre more recently than the date stated by the councillor. So I need to look into why that is showing as the most recent dated content. We have produced extensive video a few months ago regarding the building works by Metnor at the site, and featuring interviews from the council leader and cabinet members and site officials and officers about the work. And we're currently waiting with some anticipation for the ability to be able to discuss the name for the new project, which will provide another platform for more content. But that's a fair comment about the dating, because if that's what the councillor is seeing, that's what the public is seeing. So we'll need to look into making sure that if we have produced more contemporaneous content, it is reflected in the way that is presented on the website. So I'll go away and take that away and look into it.
Okay, thank you for that. I see, Mr. Blatch, you have a hand raised.
Thank you. Well, 2 points. The first, when I put my hand up, it was in respect of the point raised by Councillor Withington. Yes, members do have an important role in promoting the council's communications, but that does need to be on the basis of onward promotion of corporate messaging, because obviously the council needs to be a neutral as in its conduct and delivery of messaging, and then members have a role in promoting that through their own onward networks and followers. And it's not inappropriate then for members to be able to put their own spin or added value on that, but the key messages need to be neutral and objective in their messaging. The second point in respect of Councillor Housden's comments about the currency or contemporaneous nature of messaging is absolutely true. And that's something that Mr. Ferrari wishes to tackle, but I would say that I wouldn't underestimate the very significant pressure and demand that the COVID situation has placed on the communications team at the council. You know, it isn't just what you see outwardly facing in terms of the messaging. Joe and Felix and Megan are attending a number of county-wide meetings on a regular basis to ensure that the messaging comes from national government through the Norfolk Resilience Forum and then is delivered to our communities locally. And I know that many parts of the council have been capacity has needed to be refocused as part of the COVID response, but I do think that the burden or the load that's been carried by the communications team has been very significant indeed.
Yeah,
but
thank you for that.
The fundamental point that Councillor Housden raised is around currency is absolutely correct.
Okay, thank you for that, and the points are taken. I'm mindful that in the chat there has been comment with regard to media protocol and the need for that to go before the Constitution Working Party, and I see that Emma Denny has put that forward on the agenda for that to be done. I'm also mindful that some members may well not warm to the social media opportunity, and I kind of recognize that. So I think total, or should I say too heavy a reliance on social media might not be a good thing. And I'm sure, as your strategy suggests, it needs to be multimedia and in order to reach the wider audience. And I think the only comment really that I've got to add, because it seems to me, and I'm no expert on communication strategy, I have to say, but it seems an ambitious agenda, and that's good. I assume you are comfortable that you have the resources to deliver it. And my second point is, how will we know whether this strategy is being successfully delivered? In other words, what kind of performance measures will there be? And we have talked about some performance measures with regard to social media, but as we've already said, social media is one part of that. There's a much wider range of indicators that will be necessary in order to demonstrate whether the strategy is successful. So would you like to respond on those, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So resource-wise, yes, I think with my appointment in March, where prior to that, for a period of time, there was no full-time communications manager, has been an important step forward for the council's commitment to improving its communications. And in Felix and Megan, I have two fantastic and enthusiastic team members that are very well placed in terms of their skills and experience to help achieve some of the objectives laid down in the strategy. So with the pending question of the graphic designer to further enhance from a communications perspective the visual appeal and effectiveness of our comms, then I think we would be well placed resource wise to provide a great service to the council. In terms of what does success look like, it's a really good point. So social media is the most easily quantifiable success or lack of success in terms of, the numbers are there. The numbers are transparent. You can see from followers and from engagement statistics what is landing well and what is not landing so well. We need to do some work internally to crunch the numbers on the website to understand how that is performing, what pages are more frequently visited, and whether any pages are less frequently visited and why that may be. And that's something that I look forward to working with our colleagues in IT and customer services who manage the website on. And then apart from that, some of it's harder to quantify. So for example, a key objective is to improve interaction with external media. And whilst in years gone by, communications teams in the public and private sector might have used a metric such as number of column inches about the organization which appears in local newspapers, that's not necessarily an indication of success. You can have thousands of column inches appear about your organization if your comms are terrible, for example, because there's a lot of bad news around and it's being reflected. So some of that is going to be more subjective, and I will certainly report regularly to Mr. Blatch, who is my line manager, and to other officers and members about how we're doing against some of those more subjective objectives, which is about, is our messaging landing? Are we getting more feedback and interaction? I want to take the point that you raised as well, and other councillors have raised in this meeting and previously about social media and whether everybody is comfortable or keen to access our information via social media. You're absolutely right. It cannot be the too dominant a feature of our communication strategy due to the age demographic and other factors which affect social media usage, such as broadband penetration in our area, but it is the future, and therefore we do need to be on top of it and be proactive and be modern and do it well as we can. But it's not at the expense of good interaction with the local media, which reaches a bigger audience than we can currently reach through our channels, and other methodologies, including, for example, to use a recent one, use of posters or printed material where appropriate. We've used posters quite effectively, I believe, in the last few days to reach out to residents in the Fakenham area about a rise in COVID numbers in that particular part of our district, just because it's another way to reach people who may not access information and messaging from the council via digital means. Print is expensive and slow for us to produce as an entity, but it does reach parts of the demographic that aren't reached via other means. So we're not closed to that kind of communication. There is an emphasis on digital communication because I believe that 5-10 years from now, that will have an increasingly dominant role in the way that organizations such as us communicate with the people we need to reach to. But at this stage, it's not the exclusive drive of this proposed strategy or of my preferences as your communications manager. So yeah, I hear that, and that's certainly something that we're open to.
Okay, thank you for that. If we're all done then, does anybody have any particular recommendations they'd like to make with regard to this? I think, Mr. Ferrari, you've undertaken to take forward the matter of greater involvement of elected members. So that seems to be taken care of. Any other points anybody wants to raise in way of a recommendation? Councillor Housden.
Could we look at opportunities of achieving a positive revenue stream from it?
Thank you for that. Any other thoughts on that? A positive revenue stream opportunity and the exploration of it. Does anybody?
Yes, Chair, we can take. Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, Chair, we can take that forward as an act. We can take that forward as an action to explore the extent to which any income might be generated through the communications approach, either through advertising or other means of income generation. Obviously, if we manage advertisements through any or sponsorship of the council's actions or through our assets, there may need to be some investment made in the administration of that in terms of a member of staff to manage or oversee that activity, but it's something that we can give consideration to.
Okay, right. Councillor Fredericks?
Just a brief thing. We've looked at an increase in people joining the platform next door recently. It seems that our demographic quite likes that communication channel, and the police use that quite a lot to spread messaging. So I'm just wondering, Joe, could you look at that? Thank you.
Okay, right. So
yes.
With those proposed sort of actions for managers to take forward, that probably takes care of any formal recommendations. So I think, unless anybody's got any other points to raise, we have reviewed and we've commented on the draft strategy, but we've got no formal recommendations as such. Do I have a proposer for that? Councillor Mancini-Boyle and Councillor Fredericks to second. Do you wish a formal vote on this, Matt?
I think a show of hands is fine. There's no kind of solid recommendations there as such.
Fine. A show of hands then, please, to accept that. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Right. I'm conscious we've been going just over 2 hours. Does anybody? We've got one substantive item left on the agenda, the splash matter, and then a review of our work programs. Does anybody? Would anybody like to take a comfort break at this point? Or would you prefer we push on? I'm seeing some nods towards pushing on and the odd thumb as well. Let's push on. Okay then, item 13, we have an update on the Sheringham Leisure Centre project. I think that's over to you, Mr. Young.
No, me.
Oh, sorry, sorry, Councillor Gay. Yes, forgetting you are there. I didn't realise you were on the screen. Councillor Gay.
I think I'm on the screen now.
You are.
Chairman. I've been blanking myself up till now. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd just like to begin by thanking Kate Rawlings and Rob Young, because they put a great deal of thought into the additional tables and figures which we have with us today to give us more insight into the finances of the project. So thank you to them. I also have apologies to you from Metnor, the construction company. They have an on-site senior director visit today and a health and safety audit, so they can't be with us. But in response to Councillor Mancini Boyle's request at the last meeting that we have something which would enable us to visualise progress on the project, Kate is going to present to us some time-lapsed photographs and pictures of what has been going on project so that we can imagine it better, as we can't visit it at the moment. And I should like to say that before we get to that, we'll deal with these papers here. First thing is that the timescale for the project and the budget for the project are remaining unchanged as of this morning from the last time I reported to you, which was in December. And moving through this, it's really in the issues log that we take the temperature of what has been going on in this project, I think, for the best. I'd like to say that Metnor is doing its absolute utmost to protect the project from infection on site, which would be a threat to the project. I should also say that no new issues have been identified. And as a result of the November lockdown, there were able to be some surveys conducted of the splash prior to the end of its life, and those did not give rise to any concerns, as we can see here. But it's also made quite clear here that with a third lockdown, this does trigger another assessment, another evaluation of the question of when and in what circumstances an early demolition might be contemplated. So that's made quite clear here. And I would hope to have a detailed review of that for you by the next meeting. As you will see, this will be, as I've said, this is the third time that this will be reviewed. And the report, which I should bring to you next time, will consider the various possibilities and scenarios and perhaps recommend an optimum response to this. But clearly, the third lockdown has triggered the need for another evaluation, and that will be taking place. That will be coming to you. I think that these are the important things that I would like to say to you with regard to this first and routine part of the report. But then in your annexes, you have some extra information which should be able to make it quite clear where there have been variations within the project. So you can see what is actually committed spend. That's not necessarily what's been spent so far. It's what the liabilities would be if this was stopped this morning. So some of these bills may not have been paid, but they will be going to have to be paid. They are committed spend. And they will show that this shows you that the budget overspend, the £135,000, roughly approaching £136,000, has not changed since the last time, but it should show you how it's derived. So you could see the breakdown of the budget for the construction project. You have a table of the variations listed out quite carefully. And I think then these very interesting spend profiles for the main construction contract, which is an idea that I think Kate came up with to show you the progress across the project. We're roughly halfway through in terms of spending, and you can see the pattern both in the short term from month to month and the longer term cumulative effect here. And as you can see, the expected cash flows quite clearly there, they're marked in blue. My my printed out copy is all grey, so I have to be careful with colours here. But your expected cash flow should be blue and actual cash flow in red. And you can see the relationships between those things. So I hope that this is helpful in responding to your request from the last report for more information. And if I may, I'd just like to make a comment on the communications, which ended the last item. It's absolutely true that there is significantly more information on the website since March 2020. That is not the last time information was put on there. However, if the weakness with the website that I always notice is with the search function. Sometimes when you put things in, you find that the terminology that you're using does not match up, does not get results. You try something else, you try something else. I think it needs to be a bit more sensitive, the search function. That is the comment which I would make. I think that's about all that I would like to say at this stage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gay. Couple of points before we just move on to the next stage. Just to clarify the table in the annex, as I understand it, the 136,000 in round terms projected overspend takes into account that the contingency sums that were built into the budgets will have been consumed, and so therefore the 136,000 will be in addition to the contingencies that will have been set aside to cover. I think there were two types of contingencies that were originally put in the budget.
To clarify this, Councillor Dixon, my understanding is that the contingencies are absolutely part of this. They will not be sums added on to that £135,000. The contingencies are contained within this, and as you can see that they are listed out in one of the tables here, but they are not additional sums of money. And it is also my understanding that that 135,000 plus has been budgeted for. So it's not an unforeseen charge.
I thought I understood, but I'm not sure that I do now. When we started the project off, we built in some contingencies. What I need to be clear about is this 136,000 is yes, on top of the contingencies that we have already built into the budget. Is that correct? You're on mute.
I don't want to mislead you, Councillor Dixon. That is absolutely the last thing I would want to do this morning. So I think I'm going to ask for some further clarification, possibly from Mr. Young, because my understanding is that this is all wrapped up together, and yes, it has been accounted for. But thank you,
Mr. Young.
That is a correct assumption. So those contingencies were set out at the beginning within the overall budget. They reduce as we move towards the end of the project, and they become more known. And in fact, the contingencies that are written there as approximately 33,000 and 50,000 will be reviewed fairly soon to understand whether we need to take some more money out of those contingencies to put into costs which have been expended or changes that have been agreed. So yes, they are within that overall 135,803. So there is a possibility, I suppose, that they won't be spent, in which case that sum would reduce. But I think it's expected that we would need to draw fully on those contingencies.
Okay, I think that's helpful. I think just to be absolutely clear, that 136,000 is the projected budget position at the end of the project. And from that, you will subtract the contingencies of 50 and 33.5 from that, and then there'll be a balance which will be the true overspend. Is that correct?
Not quite. If we assume that those contingencies are needed, then the total overspend will be 135,803. If we don't need to draw on those contingencies, then that overspend will be less.
Right. Okay. Yes. Yes, so I think.
Yeah.
It's an odd way of projecting, of presenting it, but I think I've grasped it. Maybe others are well ahead of me and that's crystal clear, but I have to say that it is an odd way of presenting the overall position. It's the overall position that I'm really most concerned with. Before we move on, I don't know whether any other members have got any other issue.
Can I?
Yes, indeed.
I just wanted to say, I think in the beginning, Councillor Dixon, it wasn't the intention to present ongoing contingency figures. And what happened was that as a result of requests from members, we then began to present contingency figures in these reports. So I think the original report to you was simple overarching figures, and gradually detail has been added, and that's why it's presented to you in this way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other members are you all clear about the overall position and the reasons why we are where we are? Councillor Housden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What is the stage of construction at the moment? I'm not talking about money. What stage are we at in construction? How far down the road are we in the context of completion in August?
As I said at the beginning, we are still on track for August completion. And what Kate is going to show you in a moment should exactly show you the position, I think, as of the end of December. I think the last picture is about the end of December. So you will actually see how far advanced we are. That's just about to come up.
But I'm tracking money against progress. And at the moment, I'm only seeing 42%.
Well, all I can say is the timings are exactly on track, Councillor Housden. We are aiming for completion of the construction project in the middle of August. That hasn't changed.
Okay, thank you. And just one item for the next meeting, Mr. Chairman, if I may. Could we have the budgeted cost for the demolition of the existing facility, please?
Can we do that?
I don't see why not, but I'm going to put that question to Rob because it's not one that's been raised before.
Yes, if I may, the demolition is part of the overall construction contract. So it's the same company who was procured, so that they will be they're undertaking the completion of the new facility and the demolition and the laying out of the car park, etc. So they're contained within that main construction contract. That obviously contains a whole load of different sub-aspects, and it wouldn't be difficult for us to extract the overall sum for demolition if you wanted to see that.
Okay, thank you for that. There's one other point that I wanted to raise before we move on to the presentation. Mindful that Councillor Housden, you produced a draft spreadsheet, which I've certainly seen, and I believe Mr. Young, and I don't know whether Councillor Gay, whether you have seen it, but I wonder to what extent we can make progress with that.
Mr. Chairman, I did send it through to Rob Young, but he couldn't open that file format, so it has to be resent. And I'll send it through in a PDF format, and I'll send it through to Councillor Virginia Gay as well.
Okay, so that's work in progress then.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No? I think we're at the stage then of the presentation, Councillor Gay. If you're...
I believe Kate is doing the presentation. Kate, are you there?
Kate is going to share her screen and present the PowerPoint.
Thank you.
Just bear with me while I share my screen. So I've started off here with the architect's picture. I'll just remind everybody of what it is that we're hoping to achieve. Unfortunately, I can't take a photo from exactly this angle, as this is where Metnol's porter cabin is at the moment. But yeah, that's our architect's impression, and hopefully, as we go through these pictures, you'll see how it's really starting to become a reality. And I'm hoping for those of you who've had the chance to be on site during the year will see the progress that we've made, because there really is significant progress being made every month now. We can really see the difference. So this is the main entrance to the facility. You can see that they started to put glass in on this side of the building, and there is a hope to have the building weathertight by the end of the month. This is the south side. The windows there are on the stairwell. And this is one of the fire escapes here that you can still see down the corner. It shows the building a little bit sort of rounded there, which is just unfortunately an effect of the camera. It's not a rounded building. And this is the north side, which have all the glass ready to go in there now. That's the side of the building that faces onto the road, and that's the pool directly in on that side. That's a shot from above. You can see that the roof's now been fully completed. This area over here is above the reception, and this is the main bit above the gym and the pool halls. That's up on the roof. I'll say that's above the reception and the cafe. And these are our photovoltaic tubes that are now all fully installed, and they'll be providing hot water generation mainly for the showers. This is the main pool. Just before Christmas, that had its testing done, where they fully fill the pool hall with water, and it's left for a number of days, and the amount of evaporation is measured to make sure that the pool is not leaking before it's properly lined. And this is also the main pool filled. Down here on the side, this is where the steps are down into the pool, so it's separate from the main part of the pool. This is the very gentle steps down there to enable easy access into the pool. This is the pool as it looks now. Now it's been drained, having finished its main testing. And hopefully you can see that the roof now is starting to look like the drawings we saw many months ago, and it's all starting to take shape. This is the learner pool. That's also passed its testing and is now ready to be lined and tiled. This is the one that will have the movable floor, so that it can be raised to all different levels for different purposes. And that's a view across the two pools, looking out onto the road, so you get an idea that you've got the main pool on the left and the learner pool on the right. Is the foundations going in for the splash pad and all the water equipment that has to be connected up for that to work properly. And hopefully you can visualize that together with this is how the final splash pad will look. So now we're upstairs. This is the gym. And they're starting to put in all the partitions and walls in between the various rooms upstairs. And then we have the dance studio next to the gym. This area over here overlooks the pool hall. And this way leads through to the changing rooms and the spin studio. This is the plant room, this is the fun room, and now lots of the equipment's arrived and all the pipes and facilities are getting connected up. So there's all the power generation and all the switches and everything, and the areas where they have to carry out the flushing of the water to keep the pool running. And I was just going to finish off now with the time-lapse video of the site, which shows a couple of pictures taken every day during the construction time from the same point, so that you can see the building as it's come on. Hopefully this will play okay. And that's what I have to share with you today.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, Kate. That's very illustrative and shows us what we certainly would otherwise not be able to see. Very helpful. Okay, any other questions arising from that little presentation? Councillor Mancini-Boer?
It's not a question as such, it's to thank the members and officers for bringing the presentation. It's really, really informative. Thank you so much.
Indeed. Okay. Councillor Pearce and Councillor Rest. Councillor Pearce first.
Just to say, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee and the people who put that together, I look very intently, having had worked in heavy civil engineering, and I have to say the site, even though it's a building site, always looks presentable, clean and tidy, and I think that is a remarkable thing to adherence to health and safety. So well done.
Good, thank you. Councillor Rest.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate I'm not on the committee. If I could just ask Councillor Young a question. Back in the days when we were drawing this up, there was conversations about underwater camera systems which would replace some of the lifeguards that were needed. Is that still on the project? And if it is, I haven't seen it being fitted.
Yes, just a quick correction. It's not Councillor Young.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. I promoted you.
Yeah. So yes, it's very much part of the lifeguarding position for the new facility. So we actually operate, or everyone active operate that system in our existing centres, and it's not to replace the lifeguarding, but it's actually to supplement the lifeguarding. So the cameras are in continued operation and are triggered by certain events, so they can sort of capture what was happening at the time of an incident. There will still be lifeguards present around the pool. So yes, that is being installed, and the relevant sort of infrastructure is being provided as part of the pools around, etc. That's something which was a choice of everyone active, so they could influence that aspect of the design, because obviously they're managing the centre. So that is being incorporated. Yep.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions? Councillor Gay.
I just want to thank everyone again, all members of the committee, and Kate and Rob especially, Chairman, if I may, and to say it is very heartening to see the progress being made actually in front of us. This is going to be something to be very proud of for a district council. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. I have to say that having seen many artists' impressions and drawings, and then hearing much in the way of narratives and verbal updates, to see something pictorial and something real is extremely heartening, and I think the session has been very good to open our eyes into where the project is, and gives us more than a little measure of confidence that the project is proceeding as intended. So good, well done, thank you for that. And if we can then move on then to, I think, well, do you require a vote to be taken on this one, Matt, or not?
No, it's just noting the update.
Thank you. Okay, if you're all content then to move on, to note this and move on, then we'll move on to the Cabinet Agenda Programme, please. Item 14.
Yep, there's not really much to note on the Cabinet Work Programme. What we're seeing, we've got this up to March here, is really cyclical items, which I think everyone would expect to see. They're already on the Overview and Scrutiny Work Programme. So just looking forward to next month, February. Obviously, you'll have the capital, treasury and investment strategies there with the budget, and then moving into March, performance monitoring and budget monitoring. I suppose just to note, I did have a conversation with Helen in regards to that in-phase briefing that we're planning. We're looking potentially at the week of the 18th or the 25th, so that will be coming at the end of this month, prior to that next performance report coming forward. I'm also, I'd like to potentially get some feedback from you members. My intranet on my iPad is now working, and I was able to view in-phase. So if I can speak to you individually, and then perhaps if we can get more of your iPads working on the intranet, and hopefully we'll be in a position where that briefing can in part be interactive with in-phase. So yeah, that's everything on the Cabinet Work Programme.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions to Matt on the Cabinet Work Programme?
See, Andrew
I've got
has
a hand raised with Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a correction, if I may, to the first section on page 83 of the agenda, to the Cabinet meeting scheduled for the 1st of February. I noticed that my name appears in the fourth box along beneath Councillor Greg Hayman's name. I admire the enthusiasm of Democratic Services to retain me in Cabinet, but as that is not the case, and I don't think Councillor Greg Hayman needs any assistance from me, may I suggest that my name is removed from the Cabinet Work Programme, and I look forward to the programme including a report on food waste recycling, as we covered in the earlier item 11 on the agenda. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that, Councillor Brown. I'm sure your name will be amended. That will be amended to reflect that. On the matter of the food waste, I was going to pick that up on the next item, which is our overview and scrutiny work programme. So could we move on to item 15 then, please?
Yep. Again, so as I said, we really have cyclical items coming up in the next few months, but we do also have space there, potentially for items such as the one Andrew just suggested. I am still pursuing the equality and diversity policy. I know we want to get that in draft form to the committee as soon as possible. I'm hoping that might be next month, but I am still pursuing that, so it's still very much on the radar of the committee. There are a number of things there as well I think we can bring forward, such as depending on how soon we can get this potential impact or cost of food waste collections quantified and into a report, whether we can get that to February. I'm not sure if we have the space there, but certainly March potentially. And there's also the enforcement board, as well as other outstanding items on the work programme, which I think could be brought forward in due course, such as I think it was at the last meeting, having Dr. Halliday in to speak about the ambulance response times monitoring that they've been doing as a coastal parish working group. So I think that could be useful going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. One point that we have picked up today and you haven't mentioned is that we should have had the medium-term financial strategy before us today, and we've obviously had a conversation along the lines of why that's not the case. I wasn't obviously aware of that, so I presume then it slips into the February programme.
Yes, absolutely. If we do get a more full report, then yes, 100% it will be on the February agenda.
Okay, and with regard to the proposal of Councillor Brown with regard to food waste, that will be added to items pending and to be confirmed. Is that correct?
Yeah, I just wonder if it might be useful to discuss that under item 8, under items recommended to the committee by a member, just to clarify exactly what we want from that report. So I expect we want to see consideration of the costs, the practicalities. There was mention there of a potential rollout in towns as opposed to more rural areas first. And I think that so if we can I'll put that on item 8 for the next agenda, so we can have that discussion in more detail, and then we can look to get that report prepared for a future meeting.
Yes, I think that would be a helpful step, because mindful that we don't want to generate additional work if we can avoid it, so to speak, and if we can call upon the work that's been done in preparation of the contract as if you like base material to start with, and then add on to that anything that might be relevant, so that we get before us a report that will meet the needs that the committee is looking for.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, right. Any questions on the work programme for the committee? Councillor Housden.
Just quickly, Mr. Chairman, are we bringing Splash forward next month?
We are. We took the decision last month to review that on a monthly basis. We took that, so that's accepted that has now reverted back to its monthly reviews.
Fine, thank you.
Any other questions in relation to the committee work programme? No?
The only thing I would just note, Nigel, is I think when at the last meeting there was a agreement that further discussions would take place on how those scrutiny panels would function. Obviously, that's not happened yet, and the situation with the leader, I think it's still planned, but it will happen in due course when her situation has improved. So just to note that's again on the radar, and we will do that when we can.
Yes, I think that's work in progress, and will obviously make progress when circumstances are such that we can. Okay, any other questions in relation to the committee work programme? Are you then content to note both the cabinet and the committee work programme? Okay, good, thank you. That concludes the items on our agenda today. So it just remains for me to thank you one and all for your input today and presentations today. And